light and jovial approach to the topic, even though it is a serious topic. Please don't take my tone for any lack of respect for the concern of the problem at hand, but I think we need to just take a lighter approach when we talk about it these days as we're all just inundated. So without further ado, I'm going to dive into the myths, must-haves, and market opportunities in the age of COVID-19. I think the predominant topic that everybody wants to hear is the market opportunities, but we have a little bit of buildup to get us there. So one thing that we have when we talk about how folks can re-enter, whether that's an academic institution or the workplace, and we factor in the essential workforces that have been in play in many of these industries. We talk about the COVID-19 experience journey, and we want to fundamentally understand where people are on this journey. So we've all been through the shock, realization, and response to this global pandemic. We've gone through business continuity, and for the most part, most organizations and most workforces feel really productive. So it's been a forced exercise in change management and a focus on productivity, and somehow the world has responded, and the response is, hey, we can do this. So now we pivot to talking about reopening, as we were just talking about at the top of the call, and specific to the opportunities in front of university research parks. I think if we're focused on the opportunities at hand, there's not only a reopening, but a significant ramp up that I can see coming into play. And I'm going to share a few examples of where I see that happening today. So how do we get over the hurdle of reopening and prepare for ramp up and really reimagine what we need to be moving forward in a post-COVID-19 world to maximize the opportunity for our individual research parks and the tenants within them. And today, along this journey, as we're traveling to what we'll call our next normal, there's 3 stops along it that I want to focus on. 1, the myths. So as we learn more and more about the COVID-19 pandemic every single day, the medical implications of it, the social implications of it, how it's transferred, etc. There's a whole lot of myths out there, both myths based in the medical world and myths based in our response as human beings to it. So I thought a fun area to begin with would be to review and debunk some of those common questions I get that I'll categorize as myths related to COVID-19. Next, I want to talk about must-haves that research parks have never at large been fantastic moving in providing as a part of the tenant experience. I'm going to go into some of those amenities and must-haves that I think become even more essential based on where we are today. And last but not least, I'm going to take you through some very real case studies of opportunities that are happening specifically in the biotech world as a result of COVID-19, and talk about what that could mean for university research parks and focus on specifically what you need to be prepared for that and what you should be looking for in enticing these types of opportunities to these centers. Any questions here? I do welcome at any point interruptions. It will keep this much more fun if you keep me on my toes. Great, we'll keep moving. So myths. So first things first. The biggest question I'm always asked is, well, what's the perfect solution? What's the silver bullet, or in this case, the silvery bullet? The answer is, unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. A lot of people ask me, what can we do right? What's best in class? How much do we have to spend to make our facilities, our places of work, our places of higher learning appropriate for bringing students, bringing our workforces back? And the answer I have to give everyone is there's no magic scope, there's no perfect technology, there's no amount of money that you can spend to create a perfect solution here. And well, that can be very foreboding. It's actually really good news, because it means that we have to design the right solution for us based on our use case, based on our risk profile, and somehow that becomes much more palatable and much more achievable. There's a lot of organizations that simply could not do the perfect solution if a perfect solution existed. But knowing that we're all in this together, and together we each have to track our own courses, learning and measuring from each other, but at the end of the day, following what our own plan says for ourselves is really important. I spent a lot of my time helping different organizations figure out what that plan looks like for them and how do they minimize the real tangible health risks within their properties, their labs, their offices, their university settings, but balance that also with the psychological needs that human beings need for returning to the work. So, well, there is no perfect solution. The good news is there is a best solution for every single group out there. This is a second question that I just need to debunk because I get challenged on this in nearly every work session I go to. People come to me and they're like, we've done our planning, you know, here's our social distancing floor plan. And I look at it and almost every single time I see a bunch of 6-foot diameter radiuses indicating the space at which someone will occupy. And I just have to debunk it because everyone looks at me and kind of ruffles their head as I say, well, at a minimum, I'd like you to use a 7.5-foot diameter because we're talking about a person having 3-foot radiuses beyond their own person, assuming that other people also maintain, you know, a 3-foot boundary amongst themselves. So where does that extra 7.5 foot come from? Well, I think we're being conservative in assuming the human body at large only has a 1.5-foot radius. But yes, it accommodates the fact that human beings actually take up mass and aren't thin sheets of paper. So I just want to throw this out there because I'm surprised how many organizations invest lots of money and time into planning social distancing strategies and completely miss the boat in realizing that human beings take up space beyond that 6 foot of distancing. So I thought I would throw this out there. I'm just curious, has anyone else on the phone come across this where you've seen a social distance strategy, but it didn't really allow for human beings to take up space? If you haven't, I'm sure you will. You have? Who's that?
Absolutely.
Speaking?
This is Leah Burton at Centennial Campus. And I keep on thinking, you know, I'm no mathematician. I don't have a PhD in geometry, but I don't think those numbers work.
Yeah, you know, thank you for saying that, but I literally get questioned on this every single day and people want to challenge it. And I say, I think 7.5 feet is, if you look at the population of the United States and, you know, barometric data, you know, I would say that's conservative. You might want to go more aggressive depending on your population center. But so that's just another myth I choose to debunk because it serves my own personal interest in having to defend my position on a daily basis. The next one is, you know, we always see the, you know, great, amazing stories that people share about their homemade masks and PPE. And, you know, there's that old adage that homemade food is always better. Well, that doesn't ring true in PPE. You know, we obviously know that medical grade equipment, even if it isn't, you know, N95 masks, does provide a better, more consistent protection for us. But we do see really fantastic creativity, particularly this gentleman who is in China, who is converting water bottles into his own face screen. So I thought this was just worth sharing. But again, myth debunked, homemade isn't always better. Another idea when we're talking to people, particularly about the real estate that they occupy, you know, in research parks, they start to think that, oh, well, you know, I'm going to have to allow for more square footage per person. And if we look at sort of the history of office space planning, you know, back at the turn of the century, the average was about 325 square foot per person. Now that wasn't for the workstation, but that was the overall square foot of the administrative offices outside of lab space that we would see in, you know, a research park facility. You know, no less than 10 years later, that was cut in more than half with hoteling and hot desking and things of that nature, and undedicated, unassigned workstations, remote work, etc. So the big question is, now in 2020 and beyond, do we have to go back to these square foot allocations of 325 square foot per person or greater? And the answer is, I don't see anyone doing that. Most people have been so successful in taking non-essential and non-lab and scientific-based work, non-manufacturing work, out of the workplace and providing work from home, or really what I like to coin work from anywhere options, that there's no need to have such a huge dedicated office space any longer. And furthermore, they're not providing large 10 by 10 private offices for these remote workforces. So it brings us into this new world, and it's an idea I'm going to talk about more a little later, of pre-address clean office space, but really maintaining an efficient square footage per person, while still protecting the health and well-being of our workforces. So myth busted, we're not all coming back to great fancy private offices that protect us in our own little bubbles, unfortunately. And the last thing I just want to do in the myth category, as we all know, there's many of them, some comical and some terrifying, is provide you some other resources. So for those of you that are looking for a more medical bend to myth bust, the Mayo Clinic has a great site that talks about some of the myths related to the pandemic. And for those of you who want a little more tongue-in-cheek approach, the Telegraph UK, one of the UK's largest newspapers, has a bit more fun with a spin of British humor, myth busting and conspiracy theory list as well. So I encourage you to take a look at those. As we all know, drinking Clorox bleach is not the answer. All right. So let's move forward from our myths, which hopefully those were light and engaging, to some of the must-haves that we're seeing. And this is going a little bit into the realm of master planning and master strategy for university research parks. And in particular, you know, university research parks aren't known for being overly amenity-based. They haven't really have to be. I once heard a joke from a chief scientific and chief medical officer at a biotech firm that, hey, if our communicable diseases don't kill you, the cafeteria will. When we look at returning back to work, and I'm talking to executives in C-suite, particularly from biotech companies and biotech companies involved in part of the response to the pandemic, I'm getting a lot more requests for amenity, and that's balanced in fears of coming back to work and their workforces not being able to come back for certain reasons, but also how they're serving and why they're asking people to come back to work if they're not in essential roles where people must physically be on site to do their job. Recognizing some people, and many people are in those essential roles, there's still a large percentage of the workforce that is not. So here are the top must-haves that keep coming up in requests for me and John when our clients are looking for space. Number one, food and beverage is a big unknown and big shortage. So we have this great quote here from, ironically, Unknown, but first we eat, then we do everything else. And as we're coming back to work, with limited options in most university research parks and the peripheral communities that support them also having limited options, longer queuing, we need to find new ways to feed and provide sustenance to these workforces as we're bringing them back. So this is a great option from Sweet Green, if you're familiar with that F&B concept. But they do this great outpost where you pre-order your lunch the day before, or I think up to 2 hours before lunchtime, and you get great, privately packaged, healthy, meals delivered to your workplace. But we need to be more creative in offering these to clients and tenants of all sizes, which might mean that it's actually the university research park leaders that come together to provide these as options and amenities to their tenants. Another huge thing, which I had to chuckle at, I was on a phone call earlier this week with the entire C-suite team from a large biotech firm that is actually working on one of the vaccination approaches for the pandemic. We're going through space planning for a new headquarters development. And, we have not identified a location for that headquarters to relocate to, but we're starting to understand how do we need to use that space. And at the end of the call, and we've been working on this for a long time, pre-COVID, so it wasn't new. But at the end of the call, the chief human resource officer said, and I'm going to finally get my daycare. And we had talked about everything from the lab to the kitchen sink. So I kind of chuckled at it at first. I thought she was kidding. She absolutely was not kidding. And she made it clear that they would never be able to successfully bring their even essential workforce back in full until they started providing options for childcare. And they needed to be prepared for future pandemics and for future stay-at-home orders with some type of a childcare option as a part of their new primary operating facilities. So I was surprised, but we are doing a lot more childcare tied to these types of centers as we move forward in our planning. You know, another option that should come with no surprise is people are needing to move fast. I'm talking to lots of groups that are expecting 2x and 3x headcount increases over the next 3 to 9 months. And these groups are going to be looking for spec space, so adaptable spaces that are ready for quick occupancy in both the administrative offices, lab space, and other similar spaces such as manufacturing and logistics. And we'll talk about a few examples of those in a minute. But being able to go out and produce or have spec space, whether that's shell or whether that's actually fitted out space, is really going to be essential for university research parks to be locations of choice for some of these new, really kind of small emerging companies that are coming onto the scene and taking leadership roles in our response to the pandemic. The second to last thing is logistics. I think there's always been this awareness that university research parks were industry adjacent, meaning they were within proximity to great logistics, but many of them don't actually score very high when you look at logistics centers at large, which makes it difficult for some of their occupants that focus on actually producing some sort of a product that needs to be distributed at mass. And with a lot of the companies looking for space and looking to enter research park families, we're going to see more and more requests for this. So that traditional adjacency has to become more core to the planning and expansion exercises for research parks as they continue to evolve. And I love this quote. If you don't know Sun Tzu, famous Chinese military leader, but the line between order and disorder lies in logistics, and that couldn't be more true. And the last thing I wanted to focus on as sort of a must-have is being more startup friendly. As I mentioned, a lot of the players that we're seeing taking principal roles in the biotech and life sciences response to the pandemic are actually coming out of small family-owned companies or startups that have been around for less than 12 months or 24 months in some cases, which in some ways is fantastic, in some ways is phenomenally mind-bogglingly confusing. But we need our university research parks to live up to that promise of incubation. And I love this quote from Stephen Hogan, who is a state politician in Colorado, but he said, "You can't have $1 million dream without a minimum wage work ethic." And I think part of the reason that we are, as a country, inviting these smaller groups to take front row leadership positions in responding to the pandemic is that they can move more quickly and they have a better work ethic around it. So it's sometimes hard to take big, whopping organizations like Merck or Amgen, et cetera, and make them move at the pace that they need to. But we're seeing some quick moving innovators, but they need to partner with people that are a little bit more startup friendly in the research park arena. So that was my take on some must-haves. I want to pause for a second here and just say, anything surprising, anything that you feel like you excel in your own property, in your own community, or those things that people are currently working on today?
Adam, can you expound on, you mentioned the need for, in the next couple of months, Spec Space and companies coming in. What are those companies, what do they need the space for if people are going to be continuing to work from home?
Great. So I have a couple case studies coming up actually. So if you don't mind, I'll steal I'll keep my thunder for that. But okay. I will answer that question, and it's almost the perfect transition. Let me see if anyone else has a question, and then I'll move on and answer that.
Adam, I have a question. This is Cynthia Fallon from the University of Illinois. And I noticed that residential space was not something you mentioned, but it's been part of the conversation for university research parks for quite a while now.
So yes, I actually cut my slides down, but I had hospitality and multifamily housing as additional adjacencies. And I think that those are both equally important as well. And again, if we look at index scores, and we look nationally or even internationally at research parks, there's going to be a wide breadth of strengths in logistics as well as strengths in hospitality and hotel availability as well as multifamily housing and housing communities at large. So I think that the economic development and the job growth numbers have to be factored in ratio to partnerships with housing developers. But the fact of the matter is, some of the new developments we're seeing are coming in so fast, and housing developers can come in fast, but they won't come in fast enough. So workforces will be commuting for a while until new communities can emerge and grow and become populated and have schools follow. So, the growth of communities is really hard as you look at, what needs to follow those. And it's that, pre-care to 12th grade, K through 12 type education that needs to come in behind it to really make knowledge workers attracted to those areas. And so the housing question is another story for another day. I do analysis on this quite frequently. We look at the BioTech, and I'm actually from Illinois originally, so I'll shout out to Illini there. Born and raised for 30 years of my life. But I currently live in the Mid-Atlantic, and if we look at the BioTech corridor in the Potomac, just north of DC into Maryland, we look at a lot of biotech companies growing and emerging in that area, and we look at the public school district using biotech growth as one of the #1 leading indicators for how they plan their capital strategy over the next 10 years. So the multifamily housing question can't be isolated to housing. You have to go on to lifestyle development and community development, and that's a longer lecture for another day, but it's absolutely essential.
Got it. Thank you.
I mean, if you're interested to learn from what we're doing in the Mid-Atlantic, I think, there's definitely, listen, I know the area you're in very, very well. And, I definitely have some points of view on how that needs to evolve to continue to grow. It used to be the only major employers down there were folks like Caterpillar. And, that's obviously not the case anymore, but we can still do better. Make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So opportunity. Yep, go ahead.
Can I ask you a quick question? This is Harry Brisson from the University of South Alabama in Mobile, Alabama. I had seen a couple of months back that Nationwide Insurance had made the determination that they were closing like their 5 largest offices nationwide blanket, like permanent moving forward. Have you seen any other large corporations follow suit? And do you feel that at some point Nationwide will swing the pendulum back the other way and kind of have that boomerang effect you were talking about, where they go too far to one extreme and then find themselves back in the middle at some point?
Yeah, so we work with Nationwide, so there's some things I probably can't say, but the things that I can say that are public are, I like the bravery and the confidence in their statement. I like that they're out there putting a flag in the ground around that. I do think anyone who is considering doing that is very concerned with culture and talent and the way that learning and collaboration is going to slow down as a result of it. So those are key metrics that folks in their situation are trying to figure out how to measure. And no, I haven't seen anyone else be that brave. And most large, blue chip, billion-dollar organizations have an idea of a possible reduction of square footage over the next 5 years as lease opportunities allow them to do it. But the most aggressive plans I'm seeing are still in the 20 to 30%. And that's across the financial sector, the biotech sector, et cetera. As far as a reducing overall square footage, I really don't see anyone with ambitions of greater than 20% across many, many different industries that I'm working on. Nationwide is the only one that I've seen make that large of a claim. I am seeing some smaller organizations. We're working, I work with a lot of not-for-profits in DC, for example, and, they might only have, employee bases of a couple hundred people, and they're starting to get more provocative in what they're willing to do. But again, so much of their revenue is based on bringing people together for thought leadership that it's hard for them to walk away from dedicated space that they control. So the short answer is no, I don't see anyone else doing it. And I'm not even sure that, Nationwide can follow through with explicitly what they've sort of committed to. I do think there'll be a little bit of a bounce back, to pull together culture and collaboration. And I'll talk about that more later, but, those are things that, people want to come back. We pulled over, I think, 1,000 different organizations and continue to pull them. And there's 3 measures of sentiment that are most interesting to me. Number 1, people feel productive from home at large. Number 2, people are afraid to come back to the office. And those 2 measurements of sentiment have not changed very much over the last 2 months. The one thing that has changed is that people want to come back to the office. So when we first started pulling people a little over 2 months ago, a very low desire to come back to work. Now as we're pulling, that's upwards of 80% and higher, that people want to come back. And they want to come back to socialize and to informally collaborate are the number 1 reasons. And they want to do that in person in a workplace. I think they're also getting tired of homeschooling their children, and that might factor in, but there's a lot of things going on there. Does that answer the question?
It absolutely does. Thanks, Adam.
Of course. All right. What we all came for. So I hate the phrase opportunities coming out of the pandemic, but in our response to pandemic, we can survive or we can prosper. And I choose to be in the latter category of people who understand how to prosper, because the alternative doesn't seem very great. But that being said, there are opportunities that have been coming out of the COVID-19 area. And I want to spend a moment to talk about some specific opportunities, that we're either involved in or very close to, and just for a second, introduce them and then allow people to ask questions to see how these types of opportunities might factor into the plans for your own research parks. But the first one is a fairly new organization, Flow. So, I'm not sure if people are familiar with them or not. They're only about 2 years old. Now they're in partnership with VCU. So they're in Virginia. And it really began with Dr. Frank Gupton, and he was a part of VCU's Medicines for All Institute. And as an organization, they were a large recipient of funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, doing a lot of great work around generics. And in particular, they were able to increase capacity and dramatically reduce the cost of a specific HIV drug that put them really on the global map of being one of the truly most provocative innovators in vaccination medicine and development. Now, Dr. Gupton reached out to a gentleman named Eric Edwards, who is now the CEO of Flow from another pharmaceutical organization, and they formed Flow Corp not too long ago, and they have a manufacturing partner named Civica. So this organization, Flow, has benefited dramatically from the administration's onshoring policies of wanting to manufacture pharmaceuticals in the United States. Predominantly now they're manufactured in India and China. So recently BARDA, who we've, I'm sure, all seen in the news recently, but maybe never heard of before, awarded them a $354 million 4-year contract to expand domestic pharmaceutical manufacturing. And keep in mind, this is a company that's about 24 months old, so that's pretty major. And then they have an option, assuming they meet certain performance goals, which they will, because we're on track to meet them, a 10-year program around an $812 million infusion from the federal government. So that is awarded money. That is not money they need to pay back. They are opening the first ever US-based strategic active pharmaceuticals ingredients reserve. So if that's unclear what that means, they make a lot of the base componentry that goes into a lot of pharmaceutical elements, specifically vaccinations. They're also going to be running continuous manufacturing. That's the big deal, as typically in biotech manufacturing, you have measured intervals and you stop for quality control. So pioneering how we build manufacturing in biotech in a clean room environment that allows for continuous manufacturing as well as simultaneous quality control is pretty innovative in itself. So currently we're looking at over 80,000 square foot of development with them across 3 buildings. There's a potential lab expansion of an existing building. And then there's another option on a 40-acre property adjacent to the current VCU property. Also, this first phase is creating 350 new jobs in the Richmond area. Those are direct employment jobs. If you think of the additional jobs around supporting that workforce, obviously the job numbers increase because of that. So, you know, what I want to say, the opportunity here is there's going to be a big increase in domestic production, particularly in the field of generics and this active pharmaceutical ingredients category. So this is just one example of a great area to be looking, and again, a partnership with VCU here. Any questions about this, or I'm sure everyone's heard something about this at this point. There's been a lot of media on this.
Yeah, Brian here, and Virginia Bio plus Tech Park is an AARP member, so we're glad that you're helping grow a company that's located in our tech park. And as I might have mentioned, we're likely to hold a session on biomanufacturing September 15th, and hopefully we'll highlight Flow and Nimble, which is in at the University of Delaware, that has similar initiative to restructure biomanufacturing in a building that Whiting Turner built. Since Whiting Turner's on the call, I'm sure they're very happy with the facility at the University of Delaware with the Nimble headquarters. But anyway, I think it's a topic of interest to this group, and this is a great overview.
Perfect. So the next opportunity I want to talk about is with a group, Puritan. So I'm not sure how many people have heard of Puritan, but unfortunately they've been in the 24-hour news cycle in the last week because if anyone recalled the news stories from last week around Trump visiting a swab manufacturing facility without his mask and them having to dispose of millions and millions of product, meaning testing kits for COVID that could no longer be used. This is them. So the photo that you see on the slide, actually the bald gentleman to the left is the CFO of Puritan. Local guy, family-owned business. They make tongue depressors and Q-tips. And he received a phone call, a voicemail, just a matter of months ago from what showed up on his caller ID as his state senator. And he was like, well, surely this is a robocall, so I'm not going to answer it. Well, it turned out it wasn't a robocall. It was his state senator calling him and saying that, you know, the federal government wanted to talk to him about an opportunity. So they wanted to take this small manufacturer, you know, in the grand scheme of things, they had $55 million in annual revenue, which in the biotech world is not a very large company, and asked them to do swab manufacturing. So they were given a $75.5 million Defense Production Act grant. They're a family-run business. It's him and his brother, his cousin, who run the business. And there's actually a small lawsuit between them at the moment, which keeps things interesting. They produce 3 of the main swab types used in COVID-19 testing, and they're ramping up production as a part of this grant from 20 million to 40 million units per month. So if you saw the news stories, a lot of them focus on the fact that 20 million units have to be disposed, and that's because it was a month's worth of production had to be eliminated. So how we're helping them, and you know, the exciting endeavor that they're going under is the redevelopment of a former government contractor industrial building. So one of the government contractor that was recently merged with Raytheon used to own a facility there. We're doing 1 year's worth of construction in 1 month. So basically in the month of June, we're creating an entire clean room manufacturing space in this existing structure, 2 10-hour shifts a day. So this is a turnkey landlord project. So when we talk about clients like this, companies like this are looking for space that can be delivered quickly and in a turnkey fashion, this is what we're making happen. Clean room manufacturing in a month to produce 40 million units of testing kits. So we're going to finish up the clean room by July 1 of this year. By the way, we started at the end of May. And then there's 2 more phases to build out the rest of the building to provide administrative offices, additional lab space, and logistics space, which all needs to be complete by Labor Day. So again, this would have been in a traditional environment, probably a 2 to 3 year project. We've designed and built it in a matter of months. And this is the type of response that groups like this need from research parks, in order to really maximize the opportunity. We know it's hard to move this quickly, but there are avenues and ways to do that to attract groups like this. Off the bat, the group says this will create 150 new jobs. As we all know, that's just the direct employment headcount. There's always ancillary lifts to the economic situation. This group is up in Maine, so Pittsfield, Maine, and I'm sure at some point this story has crossed your news feed in the last week or two, as there's obviously some controversy around it. But there are more clients like this, so the opportunity at hand here is really this broad expansion of domestic testing manufacturing, and again, the theme of domestic manufacturing overall. And again, it's a small company that really needs partnership and would do much better in a research park than on their own in this instance. So I wanted to present this as a different type of opportunity and see if anyone had any questions. We'll keep
Are
going.
are they working with, I don't know, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership in Maine, or do they work at all with, I don't know, if the University of Maine campus is not in Pittsfield, but I mean, is there any connections with any universities up in Maine?
The partners that I know at the table are all public-private partnership or government economic incentive departments that are working with them. You know, the deployment department for the state of Maine is helping them recruit and build so literally state employees are helping them with their HR requirements around creating these positions and recruiting these positions, because it is creating so many jobs so quickly for them. But to my knowledge, at least my exposure to the work we're doing for them, I have not come across a university connection at this point. I can ask though, I'll find out. Yeah, the gentleman in the mask there with the bald head is freaking out in that image because he knows he couldn't stop the Secret Service barrage, and he's sitting there thinking, I'm gonna have to throw out a month's worth of product. Oh my God. So, but yeah, I can give him a call and ask, but I think this is a group that would generally really be open to that. I mean, they're a small family business. I mean, not small, 55 million, but an interesting group. I have one last example, and unfortunately I have to keep this one confidential. But this is a clinical stage biotech company, which means they're in vaccine development. They're one of the front leaders in what analysts in the industry are predicting will be, if not the one of the leading vaccinations for COVID. They're based in the Mid-Atlantic. Currently today, the company only has about a headcount of 160, which would make them a relatively small company, but they are publicly traded. They're a leader in vaccine development. Common theme here, they've also received lots of grant money from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Interestingly, prior to COVID, they were one of the leading experts around the flu and maturing the vaccine for the flu. If everyone doesn't know, that vaccination changes routinely as more strains of the flu are introduced. So currently they have essential workers on site. They're outgrowing their campus anyway, even if COVID-19 wasn't a factor, and they're considering a build-to-suit new campus. They predict in the very short term that their headcount is going to increase by 2x to 3x. And again, this is the group I told you I was on the phone with, where they're looking for amenity spaces to go along. You know, they have certain requests that are beyond what we typically hear from groups in this situation. So one, you know, modular workspace based on a cellular design theory. You know, this is where I got the specific requests to find a daycare operator and talk about the requirements of building an adjacent daycare, food service, an athletic center, and also building expansion strategy. They're worried that as soon as they build a new headquarters for 3x the headcount they have today, that by the time it's open, they might have to add another, you know, X to that number. So they want to make sure that we're building on a plot of land and with a strategy in mind to continue to expand that campus. So a really interesting opportunity there. And we're seeing more of this coming out of the sector. So this obviously is a great opportunity for them to get out of sort of the private landlord area and get into a partnership with a an educational higher learning research park-based facility. I know there's sometimes concerns about the intellectual property associated with that and the offsets of that, but I think this in particular is a group that is less concerned with that because there's such standard and universal vaccinations that they're working on and they're focused on, being the flu and COVID. So another great example of the types of groups that need to be a part of your community today. Questions here other than who is it?
Well, I'm sure many of our members would be happy to have them locate in their park, or their bio place. But anyway, I'm sure hopefully you have access to all of our members so that
we do. Yeah.
you can make a good fit if it makes sense.
We do, and we are trying to illuminate them on those opportunities. So definitely. There's just two more thoughts I want to leave you with. One is, I think that these teams need to take a leading role in helping these groups plan reentry services. So many of these groups are so focused on rapid ramp up or maintaining their essential workforce that they haven't had the time that some other organizations have had to do in really planning for reentry. So whether that's helping them with socially distanced floor plans and a strategy around that, or reentry and recommendation standards for the whole campus or an individual facility, that's something that these groups would really benefit from, to promote health and wellness, ensure whether it's classroom or workplace that it's resilient and ready, and so that we can monitor the effectiveness of the changes that we make and have consistency in change. You don't want to have one group in a campus not re-enter intelligently and have a large problem. Even if it's isolated to that building, the whole campus is going to have to respond to it. So it really needs to have a more inclusive, holistic campus response where you engage these groups on their reentry strategies, and at the minimum do a gap analysis. So we have a lot of people with just saying, let's look at your planning to date and let's provide you a industry specific gap analysis to see if you're on track, and maybe we can help you make some better choices, or maybe your choices are perfect and now that's the case. So but this is one area where we can be helping all tenants, all groups, all partnerships, regardless of if they're biotech or any other industry sector that might be a part of our campus family. And then last but not least, the question of turnkey came up. And I think when we look at doing turnkey for some of these groups to fuse opportunities, we want to look at 6 areas into the planning process. One, hyper-focus on health and wellness, that should go without saying. And I don't really like this image for this because I'm not actually a proponent of thermal scanning at all for many reasons, unless it's in a clean room environment. But I do think overall, whether it's centralized health and wellness services on the campus or a requirement in people's leases to dedicate isolation rooms and certain health policies or just health programs coming from the campus at large that all tenants can take advantage of are really critical. Recognizing that people are going to work from anywhere environments, so we have to have some enhanced features to enable that. Smart office monitoring, having things like an indoor air quality sensor or occupancy centers just being core to all buildings. They're not expensive. They do a lot of good. And I think that's an attractive offering that people are going to be looking for. Learning how to do modular laboratory. This concept of cellular design, which is really highly flexible design, and what I like to call it is results-based design standards. So we're not designing space for people to work because of hierarchy or organization, but rather we're providing highly flexible spaces that people can easily adapt so they can get results done. They can work the way they need to work that day, that week, that month. And last but not least, I talked about everyone going from 300 plus square feet down to 100 square feet, and how do we not go back to that 300 per square foot per person metric? And the answer for me is a free address, clean desk strategy. So it's not hot desking, but it allows people to come in to the office and work how they need to work, have a space to work, but we don't allow personal things so that we can have enhanced janitorial. And we have people, just use an app on their phone to check in, whether they're using a meeting room or a desk or what have you, but moving away from this idea of I'm going to have my own office space and I'm going to have a lot of personal things there, because it just doesn't lend itself well to the sanitation requirements that people are expecting when they come back to work any longer. So we don't need that. And the generational workforces aren't looking for that. They're looking for the tools to do their job. They don't need to bring a lot of personalization into the office place. So these are some trends that I think are really critical to consider if you are considering spec space or starting to develop space of your own for specific turnkey deliveries. Any questions?
So Adam, what can you just talk a little bit about, you mentioned you were kind of against the idea of thermal screening. Is that because, can you just talk about that? Is that because
Yep.
it's pre-symptomatic, it doesn't catch them, or?
Yeah, there's two reasons primarily I'm against it. One, yes, pre-symptomatic you won't have it, or asymptomatic you won't have it. And then two, a lot of people are doing it today and don't understand that they're actually violating both HIPAA and ADA laws against people's personal health information. So I have clients where I walked into their offices and there's no one there yet, but they have a security officer wanting to scan my temperature in the middle of a room with no privacy, and that's against both HIPAA and ADA. So if I had the gumption to be a pain in someone's side and maybe retire early, I could do that. But it's just not necessary, because it's not 100% effective, and most people can't execute it well. And most states even have laws requiring either registered nurse or a nurse's aide or a medical aide to administer any type of temperature reading. So people just aren't being compliant with healthcare law, and that's a very dangerous and slippery slope to play with.
Okay, any questions from our participants? Just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask the question.
I've either bored people to tears, or go ahead.
This is Dan Duncan at Nebraska Innovation Campus. As people, we've all coveted daycares, I think, for a long time, but being able to pay for daycares, especially when most of us are putting up Class A office space, can be very interesting. What strategies, are you seeing any new strategies for funding daycares?
Yeah, we're all doing, everything I'm working on is third-party operator. So there's a couple groups, groups like Goddard and there's a few others we're working with. So in a lot of cases, it's mutual investment, or it's, the risk is actually on the operator, whether that's the parent organization or a more mature, franchisee in their franchise network that's actually taking more of the capital risk there. So I think there's a lot of ways around that. I don't think you need to operate a daycare. I don't think you even need to pay for building a daycare. I think you should program for that amenity, and that's the avenue that we're taking in the situations that I'm involved in. So hopefully that's good news.
So you, Adam, you didn't get a chance to talk about hotels, but I just got an update from Graduate. They do a lot of hotels at universities, and it seems like, surprisingly to me, which I thought the hotel industry was kind of moribund, they're opening up a new hotel at University of Tennessee. They're planning hotels all across a bunch of universities. So I thought that was kind of interesting for the university sector to see that still being robust.
Yeah, well, I think that industry had a lot of growth going into that. If you look at the hotel industry, and specifically if you look at a lot of the groups that were focused on campus-based or university-adjacent type hospitality, whether that was for Big Ten schools and alumni coming to games, or whether that was for prospective students or what have you, there's been a lot of interest, a lot of private equity money thrown at groups that are willing to do that and that are building the right type of hospitality for those markets. It's definitely a price conscious but trend conscious blend of consumer in most cases. And I'm not surprised at all. I'm one of our clients right now for reentry. I'm working with Marriott, and we're building a new 700,000, 21-story headquarters for them with an adjacent hotel. And as a part of those discussions, I'm also on a task force relative to their overall cleaning strategy for all their hotel properties across all the Marriott and Starwood brands. So, the hospitality sector is, definitely in pain. But I think it's poised to make a recovery. And I think that what we're seeing most now is that people with cash, private equity has not been spending its money because prices have been so inflated over the last several years. There are a lot of big people in the hospitality capital markets and private equity world that have tons of money right now, and they're taking advantage of the uncertainty of the situation to put into motion things that they've been waiting years to take advantage of. So I am not surprised at all. And if anyone wants a hotel now is give me a call. Now is the time to go out and find the people to put a hotel up for you, because money's loose in that arena in particular because of that opportunity.
Interesting. We're getting up close to the end of the hour. Any other questions? Well, Adam, thank you. This has been a great presentation. Presumably we have permission to send this out to our members. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to share it with your members. If anyone has questions, my contact's on the back, and there's a couple links to some planning tools, life science focused, higher ed focused, on the last page as well. So those red underlined text samples are actually hyperlinks to some resources. But we're here to help. We're here to continue the conversation. If anything I said was provocative or you firmly disagree with, I'd love to hear that as well. So let me know. And I'm sure some of us are wondering, Sasquatch, you had that under a myth, and I don't know. There's going to be a debate about that from my in-laws in Oregon. But anyway, so with that, thank you, and thanks to John Gibb as well from JLL. Our next meeting is going to be, I think, July 1, right, Diana? Which would be two weeks from now.
Yes. So we will have, we will not have a peer-to-peer next week, but we'll have one on July 1st.
At 2 p.m. And again, thank you all. Unless there are last minute questions, we're going to close out right on, well, a minute or two before 3 o'clock East Coast time. So everyone, thank you. Have a good rest of the week, and we appreciate you stopping in. And again, thanks to JLL for doing a great peer-to-peer. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.